Hello everybody and welcome to Megalo Tips and Tricks number 4. Today we're going over non-destructive editing and masks. The goals for this video are to go over ways of editing the image that we can reverse. So if you remember from the preferences video, Photoshop 1, we set our states that we could go backwards to 50. Maybe some of you bumped that number up all the way to 500. But basically, once we reached that number, everything we've done before that can't be undone, which generally for using Photoshop as a sketching tool the way I do is totally fine. It's normally not that big of a deal. But if you want to be able to edit your images without making those edits permanent so that you can go back and change them later or decide that you don't want them anymore, but you don't want to lose all the work you've done in the meantime, this is how we're going to do some of that. Masks, on the other hand, are very similar to non-destructive editing. They're going to be a way for us to kind of make selections and use the eraser tool in a way that we can always undo it. So we'll just get right into it. So what we're going to be working towards is making a PDF presentation with our images that we could send to a gallery for a show application, or a grants panel for funding opportunities, or graduate school for an application. That's where we're going to be working for. So this is probably going to be a 2-part video in our series where we go over first the non-destructive editing and the masks, and then we use what we've learned, what we've done in this video, and what we've learned in the videos past to make ourselves a nice PDF of our images with good quality photos that we can easily attach to the body of an email and send it off without having to kind of do any compressing or anything like that. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to jump right in with one of these images I had of a show with a couple of friends at CCAS Monica a while back, and we're just going to start here with all of the edits we can do. So the first thing we're going to do is that we're going to just look at something that probably could have been in the selections video and go to this edit and quick mask mode. So when we're in edit and quick mask mode, you'll see that my paintbrush is using this red tool. Now, what I can do is make this as big as I want. I can select everything in the background. Let's say I just want these images. So I go and click, and if I had a stylus or an Apple Pencil or something like that, I could get in there really fine and make as good of a selection as I want. Once I've painted everything, we can turn this off, and you see it turns it into a selection. So now, I don't know why you'd want to do this, but if I were to color with my paintbrush, I can only work on that selection at any one given time. If I undid that, I could then, inverse it and do this way. That would be helpful if I wanted to use my eraser tool and get rid of the background. I could just very quickly erase everything if all I wanted was one of these little images for a detail. So that's the quick mask mode, and then you just deselect. So that's one of the masking tools, is almost more of a way to use a selection tool rather than anything else. Okay, we'll step back a little bit more. Great. We'll just double check that we're out of quick mask mode. Okay, the other thing we can do is select and mask. So we do select and masks. It will open up this window here, and we can again use our brush to make selections. Let's say we just want this one. Now, one of the things we can do in here, we have a couple things to play around with. Radius will change what that selection is focusing on. Smooth will, it's hard to tell, but smooth, if you've got something kind of where those dancing ants are, if they're not really where you want them to be, you can smooth out the path. You can feather it so that it will shrink or grow to your selection size, go as accurate as you want or not. Contrast, I believe contrast, if you up this and start making a new selection tool, it'll work more towards the contrast of the image. And then the shift edge, again, is a way you can minimally shrink or grow that selection tool. Sometimes if you make a selection and you get close, but it's like a piece of fur, which would look really weird if it was a hard edge. You can just kind of grow your selection a little bit or shrink it depending on what you need to do. Okay, so from there, we can invert it and select everything else or not, or clear the selection and start over. So if we hit OK, this will now mask everything else. So it looks like it deleted it, except it hasn't. Over here, we can see this new box has been created, and these things are all linked up. So while I've got this layer selected, if I'm working in a black and white palette, black will add to my mask, which kind of sounds a little counterintuitive, as I added to the mask and therefore my image disappeared because the mask is covering that image. But if I switch this and go to white, now I'm removing my mask and you can see the image that's below it. If you keep an eye on that little black and white box, you can see the little white arrow, or the little white patch. That's the window we're looking through to see the image below. So the bigger I make that white patch down in that little black box, the more of a window we have to see through. So let's say we had a different image. Okay, I'm gonna just get rid of this mask. And if I want to disable it and see what it looks like without the mask, I just disable it. It's still there. I can enable it again and see what I want and make sure that I have everything locked up and nice and the way I want it before I make anything permanent. Okay, so we'll delete that layer mask and kind of move on from there. So let's duplicate this image. So we got here, we'll just go to duplicate the layer, add a copy. So now all I have is just two images that we can work with. On this one up here, we're gonna add a new layer, okay? Or a layer mask. So we come here and layer mask. We have layer masks and vector masks. Vector masks are used with the pen tool and the shapes tool. We're not gonna worry about those because, I don't often use vector masks anyway, and they might be more precise, but if you're not really used to working with vectors, they're kind of tricky. I don't really ever use them, particularly for the way I use Photoshop, so we're not going to worry about vector masks. We're going to go to layer masks. And from here, we'll just hit reveal all, and this gives us a mask on our layer. So from here, if I switch to my black, and I'm going to create my thing I want to mask. Let me turn off this layer so it looks like I'm actually doing something. Okay, so I've made this patch and the circle. Okay, that works pretty good. Now if I turn my layer on, it would look like I just had a normal image because the window we're looking through is revealing the exact same image. So it's kind of unexciting. This is gonna look a little weird. If I have this layer selected and I move it, you can see that the window I've created moves with the layer that I've created. So if I, spend enough time, I could line this back up perfectly and that window would go away. Kind of cool. Anyway, if I undo that move, I'll probably have to undo it a couple times. If I unlink these layers and I move it around, I am actually moving that window box. Doesn't look like anything's happening because I have the same image underneath. But if you keep an eye on that little window, you can see the black area is moving around. So how about I make this a little bit easier to see. We'll use a gradient. Let's pick some colors. Red, great, and bright green. Why not? Or, yeah, bright green. Color in our gradient. Okay, so now we can see that layer 0 is this green to red gradient. And we've got our stuff over it. Now if I click on this, if I move this around, the mask layer is going to stay. And I'm going to be able to move the image layer around that window so I can play with that and see what it looks like. Undo that. Now let's link them up. If I do that, the window stays stuck to my photo and I can move the layer mask around. If I were to unlink it from there, now I can move it around. Link it back up, and it'll move with it. So that's how you can, if you're linked or unlinked, you can either move the selected window or not. Okay, great. So again, we're just gonna kind of step back really far and get to our background. Okay. Now, since our goal is to make a PDF presentation that is something that we can send to a gallery or a graduate school or a grants panel, we're not probably going to use much masking. I just wanted to show that for the sense that you have these tools at your disposal for working with image generation. Point of this video is not really for image generation, it's for image cleaning up. So let's go and add an adjustment layer. Down here, we have a couple shortcuts. This button right here is a quick mask. So if we selected that, it just pops up a mask layer that we can paint as a mask layer. The one next to it is adding a layer adjustment. So let's say I wanted to mess with the curves of this. Actually, I take that back. Let's say I wanted to mess with the exposure because I got a couple hot spots. What this does is it's turned my choice of, edit into a layer rather than just directly editing the image. So let's play around with this for a little bit. Turn the exposure way up, but that's not what I wanted to do. This goes back down. Okay, cool. It's a little grayed out. I could put a weird vignette on it if I wanted to. Gamma correction. And I would make it darker, lighter. Kind of like it a bit lighter. We could also just slowly edit these with our arrow keys if we wanted. That might make it a little bit better. I'm not necessarily the best photo editor in the world, but you could play around with this enough. If you get frustrated, all you gotta do is just delete the layer. Say delete layer, boom, and we're back to our normal one. Let's try a different one. Let's say we want curves. Give this a go. I could increase that. It might be a little too harsh. Click on some more points. That's starting to look really weird. I don't like any of it. Just Command Z. Normally, with curves, I bump things up, darken it, and that's all right. Those hotspots are probably going to be hard to get away. Okay, let's move on to a different photo that we can use for adjustment layers. So we go into here and we say, let's go with the color balance. Let's say, I don't know, this photo needs to be a bit warmer. Bring up the yellow, maybe the greens a little, it looks bad. Let's go to magenta and maybe the reds. We can shift this to be a little warmer. Okay, that looks all right. Great. Now, on top of that, we could mess with the curves, add some contrast. Maybe that looks pretty good. All right, great. Well, what if we had, let me change this to a layer so I can show you something. What if we had, another layer up top here, and on this, for some reason, I drew a green rectangle. Let's say I wanted to turn the green rectangle into a grayscale image. Well, if I come up to here and I say image, adjustments, and I say black and white, that's one way to do it. That would work. I can change that layer to black and white. Problem is, if I keep going through and editing and I decide, oh man, I really wish that was green, I'd have to go back and, I could select it and paint bucket it green. That wouldn't be a problem. But if this was like a second layer of a photograph and it was like a face, I couldn't just re-add the color to the face. I'd be stuck. So let's add a black and white layer. Well, the problem is that this black and white layer is changing everything below it. Okay, so we could, in theory, select both of these and drag them down below. Only problem is now they're being hidden by this total layer 0. So that doesn't work for us either. So if we want to bring the color back to layer 0 and get this to be not green anymore but stay gray, what we have to do is click on the black and white adjustment layer, and then we just have to create a clipping mask. So now this links this adjustment layer down to the layer below it, and it leaves these layers alone. That's one way we can do that. Okay, so a lot of this seems a bit silly. If our goal is to create a PDF that is able to send to a gallery, we're probably not going to draw weirdly black and white gray rectangles around our main piece. Let's just go ahead and get rid of those and just delete those layers. So at this point, what I really want to do is I'm just going to go through and maybe edit. I'm going to delete all these clipping masks that I have, and I'm just going to go through and I'm going to make some decisions about all of these, and I'm going to, use what I have to make them all look as good as I can get them. So now what I'm going to do is just go through these images and try and make them as good as I can for next week's video, which is kind of taking all of these images and adjusting them and creating a PDF presentation out of them. So I'm going to try and work, and I might speed up certain things where I'm just working through different ideas, so you don't have to just watch me slowly and painfully get my way through this. But for the most part, I'll explain why I'm deciding to do what I'm going to do using the tools that we've just gone over. So first up, this image, I don't like those hotspots. I'm going to try and get rid of them. In a non-destructive editing way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer. Say, okay. Now, I've got the same layer on top of each other, right? So this is fine. I'm going to turn layer 0 copy off, and I'm going to work on layer 0. If I change to the essentials, so if I come over here and I select my burn tool, what I can do is darken parts of the image. That's what that does. I could do, and I have different ranges, so I can use shadows, midtones, or highlights. I want to darken these highlights. So I'm going to increase my brush size, and let's say exposure at 50%, that'll probably be good. Airbrush style buildup effects, and always use pressure for size when off. Okay, we're not going to worry about that. So we can change the exposure, or we can use this airbrushing tool. We'll see what it looks like without it, and then we'll go from there. So that goes way too dark, way too quickly. I don't like it at all. Let's try lowering the exposure. So if we lower the exposure, it doesn't do too much, but it kind of looks a bit weird. So I think that's not going to work either. Try this airbrush tool, and that's okay. I don't mind that too much, but I think it could still be better. What I would actually do is increase my brush size quite a bit, and I would just click. I'm going to click a few times. That looks pretty good compared to the other one. Well, I'm still liking that. Maybe one more. That's pretty good. It's just softened it enough. Now what I could do if I wanted to get a little bit more intense is I come here, go back to the burn tool, lower my brush, maybe a couple more in there. I don't really like that, but I could play around with this as much or as little as I wanted to, because if I got, eventually those edges are just going to look kind of weird. So we'll go back and we'll just call that maybe good enough. So let's zoom out, and we'll go back to the burn tool, increase my brush up a couple, just click, click. This one seems a little bit brighter, so I might just go in there and click like that. And that seems all right to me. I'm not too upset about that. Now, the other thing I can do, and why I made a duplicate copy, is I can kind of go back and forth between these two layers. What I'm just going to do is make a mask. So if I make a mask here, I can just go and work and make this change the mask, go back to the one below it. I don't like any of that. This would be a lot easier if I had my iPad and a stylus. So if we change over here from the hard round brush that we were using to a soft round brush, this will actually make this a little bit easier. The other thing I'm going to do to make my life a bit easier is I'm going to switch over to my iPad. And I understand not everyone's going to have this capability, but I use a program called AstroPad, and this turns my iPad into a drawing tablet. So I'm just going to work on some of this with the drawing to make it a little bit easier than my mouse. I do understand that that's not an option for everybody, but we're just going to see how it goes. Okay, so in here, I can stay on my brush. And I can just go and I can choose to darken up certain parts of this. Now what I'm really doing is I'm not darkening anything. I'm just working with that. I'm erasing part of the layer that I'm on. And when I say erase, I mean I'm masking it. And I can do this as much as I want. And then if I decide I don't like that, I can just paint in with the white and erase. And so I can go as much or as little as I want. Okay, so I'm going to call that all right for now and move on to the next image. I could play around with this for a lot longer, and depending on where you are, maybe those hotspots are just one of those things you'd have to say in the photographing part, like, hey, I should just do a better job here. It depends on what you're after. For when I took this photo, I knew that those bright spots weren't going to be too big of a deal for me, so I didn't. But always remember that, it's easier to take a good photograph than it is to edit a bad photograph into being a good one. But those are some of the techniques that you could try and work. So I'm going to move on to this detail shot and see what I can kind of do. Now, you're probably going to wonder why I got rid of my signature. And for me, those magnets were a bigger problem than the requirement to have the signature on this piece for me. If I was going to use this photograph and had photographed this specifically for the purposes of documenting the print and not a detail of the exhibition, I would have moved those magnets so that they wouldn't have been a problem, so that I can retouch them away in Photoshop and keep the signature. I don't advise ever removing any signature from a piece of art. Okay, so for this one, my image is a bit crooked, and I just want to kind of pick a point and call it 100. And remember, you can go up to View and Snap, and you should be able to make that perfectly at 100. You just pick another size, say 1,000, and I'll say 100. Since I know these are square, and 1,000. Now I made this layer 0, and I'm going to use the transform command. I can then drag this around and make sure that I can square this up. Like I said, the better option is to take this photograph square. But here's how you can kind of retouch your squaring. So you can then hold the Command key and drag just one corner to where it needs to be. And now that's all square. Okay, so with that all done, I might go back in and edit these a little bit more, but for the sake of our video, I think that's pretty good. Is how you can see that we can go through, double check any of these settings that I want. Do I want it more cool? No, I kind of like that one better. These ones with color balancing, I can see that, you know, that's a little bit washed out in red. The shirt's quite cyan in real life. I can just color change that, and I can go back and forth and check and make sure. In the next video, we'll take all these images and do a little bit more editing for them to be put into a nice presentation, and we'll just see how Photoshop is more than capable of doing that for us and making sure it can also just be sent right away so you don't have to worry about things like Dropbox and other features like that. Hope this video has been useful, and we'll see you next week to kind of finish it off and, get everything right for the next Megalo application that you're going to put in. Have a good week and stay safe.